E2TH, woohoo!
Yeah. I think we can get a hashtag going there for sure. Take your seats, movie fans. The film is about to start. Welcome to Craft to Services, the show where we look at the bad films of cinematic history, the movies that critics rejected but audiences embraced. I'm your host, Aaron Coker. I'm also the host of the Just Enough Trope podcast and the Enterprising Individuals podcast on this, the Just Enough Trope Network. Find out more at justenoughtrope.com. Joining me on the show today is Alex Bledsoe, writer of the Eddie LaCrosse series, the Memphis Vampire series, the Tales of Tufa series, and the Firefly Witch series, in addition to over 50 short stories. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Alex, how did you become a movie fan? Was it something that you loved in your childhood? Is it something you developed later?
Star Wars. I was 14 when the first Star Wars came out, and it changed everything about how I looked at the world.
Yeah.
So from that point on, I was a movie fan. I became more conscious of how stories in any media were constructed, and that led directly to me being a writer.
For myself, I'm somebody who didn't really watch a lot of movies until I was older. And movies actually were verboten in my house. We weren't allowed to go to movies for complicated reasons I won't get into here. But I was somebody who, watched TV shows, and I was really into Star Trek and that sort of thing. And so I think it's one of those things where if you don't want your kid to do something, just let them do it,
Okay.
and they'll get sick of it, and then they'll go be a doctor or something like that. But it became this forbidden fruit for me, and also due to things like Star Wars and things like that. And so, yeah, I was definitely hooked. How has being a film fan influenced your work?
Well, it's like I said, I take apart just about any story I encounter. I can't stop myself from doing that anymore. and the nice thing about movies is you can absorb a movie in roughly 2 hours. A book is a much longer commitment, and in a way a deeper kind of commitment, but you can watch a movie and you can take it apart and you can say, oh, this works, this didn't. And when you know the things that do work, you can use those. And when you know things that don't, you can watch out for those.
Do you have a favorite bad movie?
Oh, yeah. My favorite bad movie is Exorcist II, The Heretic, or as I like to call it, E2TH.
Great. Well, that's the film that we're talking about today. So you get to talk about your favorite movie. You're lucky. I am not so lucky because I have to talk about Exorcist II, The Heretic. The name of this show is Craft to Services. On every episode of this podcast, we look at a film that's generally poorly rated, but usually well remembered by audiences at large. Or in the case of today's film, a front runner for the worst movie of all time. I've heard it said in some circles. It's a film that had big shoes to fill, or a big priest scholar maybe, but it was ready. It had the star from the first film, an Oscar-winning actress. I should have paused to emphasize that those are two different people. The star of the first film is not an Oscar-winning actress. The cast includes several Oscar nominees, including the director, and yet somehow it failed to catch the magic of the original Exorcist, and then some. Are you a fan, or have you been a fan of the Exorcist series?
Yeah, I really love the first one, obviously.
Yeah.
The third one, I've liked it more since they've managed to restore the original cut of it. It's a little ragged to watch because of the sources they use, but the story is much better in that version.
Yeah.
Then I kind of like Dominion.
Okay.
The one that was reshot as Exorcist the Beginning, which is just goofy.
Yeah. There's a tone that you have to sort of set, I think, especially on Exorcist movies, where if, like the first movie, and I was never really a fan of the movies. I'd never really seen the Exorcist movies until recently. And the first movie is like, it's chilling, but I feel like if you took any one of the elements out, the soundtrack or the great performances, you'd just be left with, a doll shooting, pea soup on a guy, which is inherently kind of ridiculous, but maybe that sort of contributes to how weird it is. And so, yeah, it's a fine sort of line, and this movie, E2TH, as I guess we're calling it now, treats that line as like the fault line in a long jump contest, and it just goes way, way beyond. But according to John Boorman, or at least in his mind, that seems to be what he was going for, and we'll definitely talk about that as we talk about this movie on the show. Before we get started, I just want to say that this podcast is not in the pocket of Big Tomato. We use Rotten Tomatoes as a metric in this case, but we are not beholden to them, or we don't endorse them. On the subject of Rotten Tomatoes, what do you think about sites like Rotten Tomatoes and review aggregation sites?
They have their uses. If you're looking to see just what the critical consensus is on something, it's a good guideline. But I have better luck finding critics that I tend to agree with. I tend to use those more than I do Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I use that as well. I do think that one way in which they kind of shine is that if you live in a media market that doesn't have a regular reviewer, I suppose if you live like a really small town, maybe you don't have like a guy that reviews movies for the paper or something, or maybe you get that situation where the guy that reviews movies for the paper is an idiot, and so you disagree with all of his opinions. In this case, you can look at Rotten Tomatoes and see what somebody else thinks. But with the internet, I usually tend to follow what you do or what you espouse, which is just find somebody find somebody who you kind of agree with, has similar tastes to you, and kind of get your opinions that way.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, a reverse barometer is still a barometer. So you can
exactly.
You always disagree with, you can use that as a guide as well.
Take that barometer, turn it upside down. Were you surprised at the rating that this got? This actually got a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes.
On the one hand, no. I'm aware of its reputation. I'm aware of the many criticisms against it, and many of those criticisms are valid.
Yeah.
I like it a lot better. I can overlook the deficits because of the things that I think it does well. But I can understand that, the average reviewer, the average viewer wouldn't want to put that much effort into it.
Yeah, just thinking, well, this is no good, move right on. But I think if you do move on, you miss a lot of the details of this film, especially the story behind its construction and its release. And it's a fascinating story. And I should probably just shut up and we should probably just get to it. But as far as my opinion of the rating, it's probably accurate. I think a case could be made for 0% because I think 0% looks better than 20%. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to be known as a notorious flop and a failure, go all the way.
Yeah.
So it's not that I think that it's so horribly terrible that it should be 0% and should be, salted. The earth should be salted and should just be wiped out. But that would definitely, really attract people. I think it's not 0 because it's just been kind of forgotten. People think, oh yeah, Exorcist II, that's really bad. But they forget all the details of the film, which we'll get into. Speaking of the details, it is, of course, Exorcist II, The Heretic, or E2TH. It's funny because sequel naming is always weird. People sometimes just call it, there's Jaws 2, or when you get past 3, they tend to leave the number out of the title because I guess nobody wants
subtitles.
Yeah, nobody wants to see, I don't know, Jason 8 or whatever. It was made in 1977. It has a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a 3.7 out of 10 on IMDb. It does not have a Metacritic rating, so in this case, I'll substitute the Google users rating, which is 59%. And it was
Google rating is over half?
That's right, yeah.
Wow, okay. The people do speak.
Yeah, the people don't seem to completely hate it, yeah. It was directed by John Boorman, and of course it was based on characters and the story from the original Exorcist film. Can you give us a somewhat brief plot summary of Exorcist II, Heretic?
Sure. It takes place 4 years after the first film. So Regan MacNeil, the girl who was possessed in the first movie, she's now 16. She's living in New York City. Her mother, because they couldn't get the actress to come back, is no longer part of the picture.
Right.
And she's being treated by a psychiatrist who is almost a dead ringer for her mother. And the psychiatrist believes that science can find out whatever was going on with Regan, but there's a priest who's sent by the Vatican who believes that the demon is still there inside her, and they use a device called a synchronizer to get into mutual hypnotism and allow the outsiders to go into Regan's memories, and that kind of pokes the bear where it comes to the demon Pazuzu, who starts to manifest, and it gets a little loopy.
I love the fact that there is mutual hypnotism in this film. It was designed as a cash grab, essentially. For a sequel to a movie that made a ton of money, this movie had a relatively high budget of around $14 million, which at the time was one of Warner Brothers' highest budgeted movies. It made $30 million, so not a total failure, but not a success, really. This was 1977. It was post-Jaws, post-Godfather 2, so the idea of a blockbuster and the idea of a commercial sequel were becoming the norm in Hollywood, or at least where that idea was growing. And so it would seem like it was a no-brainer to make a sequel to The Exorcist, which made $400 million off of, just a handful, just a few $1 million budget. However, Friedkin, the director from the first movie, not interested in coming back. William Peter Blatty, who wrote the book, was not interested in coming back either. And so Richard Lederer, who was a producer at Warner Brothers, produced the film, and he got John Boorman to direct the film. And anybody who is a bad movie, quote-unquote bad movie fan should know the name John Boorman. I'm sure they do. Of course, he had a smash in 1972 with Deliverance, and his next movie after that was Zardoz. Yes. Which I can't believe we haven't talked about on the show yet, but we will one day. And
the Boorman that made Zardoz is the Boorman that made this movie.
That's right. That's the Boorman that showed up to the set of this film. And it's fascinating to me because oh boy, I kind of want to just derail this and just do a John Boorman show, but we should probably stay on track. But as far as John Boorman goes, he's so eclectic in the things that he's done.
Yeah.
From Deliverance to Zardoz,
Excalibur.
Exactly, Excalibur, Beyond Rangoon. It just seems like, or Point Blank, it just seems like he's always kind of doing something different. And I think part of that, and I haven't looked into great detail, but I think part of that is probably his creativity and his desire to do a lot. But a lot of that might just be, we need somebody who's somebody that can bring it in, relatively on time. And so he's both an auteur, clearly Zardoz, but he's also like a workman, I think. I think he's somebody who can come in and kind of get the job done.
Well, I think he takes assignments that are in sympathy with his interests.
Yeah.
I don't think if he had not found, a way into Exorcist II, I don't think he would have done it. I mean, he obviously brought, huge concepts to this cash grab of a movie that really, just needed more spinning heads and pea soup to be successful.
Right. It's amazing to me that they didn't try to. A sequel always tries to top the original, so this time there should have been 2 heads spinning pea soup, or a fire hose blast of pea soup.
Yeah.
But we don't really get that.
Locusts.
Yeah, we do get locusts, which is definitely a swerve in the opposite direction. It's funny, we mentioned it being a cash grab, and it completely is. And I don't know the life and career of Richard Lederer, but he does definitely seem like a slick Hollywood producer type to me, because it's like, yeah, we get the Deliverance guy, and then script, we don't need a script. Let's get playwright William Goodhart to do it. Who exactly?
He's the real interesting guy in this because you can find virtually nothing about him.
Yeah, and
there's not even a real indication of how he got involved in this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, theoretically, any playwright, worth his salt would probably jump at the chance to get his ideas out there, make a movie, make a little money. But he had not really done a lot before this. I think he wrote a movie called Generation which I just know because I saw it on the internet. I don't know that movie at all.
No, and it was based on a play that he wrote, which was the first thing he ever wrote and became very successful on Broadway.
Yeah.
So he was a name right out of the gate, and Generation was, set in the 60s. It was about hippies and straight people trying to get along.
Sure.
And, it was very much of its time. And nothing about that screams Exorcist.
No, not at all.
So I would love to find out more about that, about how they found this guy and why he said sure.
Yeah. It's funny, or maybe depressing as well, that as I'm sure you know, Hollywood seems to be this balance between the William Goodharts, the creatives of the world, and the Richard Lederers, the producers who are looking out for the bottom line and the sort of financial side. And we have this theory as artists and creative people that if we're just given the wheel, we'll take it somewhere great. And that's not always true. I think that there is a hand that needs to be on the wheel to guide it to something that enough people would want to see to justify the expense of something. It's one thing to just sit in your study and write a great book, but if you're going to get 500 people on there and you have to have guys who heat the pea soup up, for when it's going to be shot in somebody's face, you need somebody to think about those things.
Well, there's a saying that the director Nicholas Meyer uses, which is that art thrives on restriction.
Okay.
And he was using it. I heard it in the context of describing how when he was making The Wrath of Khan, it was also a low budget cash grab sequel,
right?
But he found ways to work within that to make it something really special.
Yeah.
I think in a way Boorman was trying that too. I mean, because again, this is not a film of small ideas. This is not a rehash of the previous film at all.
Right.
It's saying that it's talking about human evolution and spiritual warfare and the manifestation of evil in this world as a locust. And those are big ideas. Those aren't just it's not Friday the 13th Part 2.
Right.
This is a whole different direction, and I really admire that. I got to say, I love sequels that do that go completely away from their original films, like Highlander 2.
Oh man.
Whatever you may say about it, it could care less about that first movie, even though all the same people were involved in it. There's no effort at continuity. There's no, we've got to bring Sean Connery back, so it doesn't really matter how. And so they don't put any thought into it.
Right, exactly.
And I admire that kind of thing. And with this movie, it's like, okay, we're going to do the thing that you should never really do, which is explain why the events of the first movie happened, why the demon chose this particular 12-year-old non-religious girl.
Uh-huh.
And then we're going to imply that there's, the next step in human evolution is this joining of minds that can take place either through the little synchronizer machine
right.
or, through the power of people like Regan.
Right.
And that's cool. I can go with that. It's in the execution that goes sour. And there's so many things that go wrong in the execution.
Yeah.
But I'll say this about the acting, and we can go into this in excruciating detail. The acting is awful, but because it's so across the board awful, because there's nobody in it who gives a good performance, it draws your attention to everything else.
Right.
You're not distracted by acting.
Right.
You can ponder the concepts, you can take in the visuals, you can listen to Ennio Morricone's score, that's the part that wholeheartedly I can get behind. I love that music.
Sure.
And because it's put together like that, it's an experience of watching a movie that you don't get very often, where you are so uninvolved that you kind of loop back around and become involved again.
Okay. You get kind of synchronized, if you will, with the film.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Boy, the synchronizer. It's such a neat idea, and it's been used to good effect in other films, like, well, just, Inception off the top of my head, like people sort of linking up their minds or whatever. But well, they had a lot of, I guess the budget was relatively high on this film. If you're not willing to spend a lot of money on the effect, though, then you really got to come up with something better than just a half in the bag classic actor sort of just staring into the camera where nothing else is going on. So they brought this guy Goodhart in to do the script, and Boorman didn't really like it, and he asked him to do a rewrite incorporating ideas from his longtime creative assistant, Rospo Pallenberg. And I feel like Rospo Pallenberg is the most interesting figure in this whole thing. He's a guy who is credited as creative assistant, whatever that means, on a lot of Boorman's films. And I was kind of looking through Boorman's career before we got recording today, and he's rewritten scripts in the past.
Right.
In fact, on Deliverance, he got into a fist fight with the guy that wrote the book and the screenplay over some of the changes that he made. And Mr. Pallenberg, who I imagine is having a lot of rings, probably.
With his shirts unbuttoned halfway down his chest.
Yeah, right. Or like an ascot or something like that. But he's, involved in this as well. So when Goodhart took a powder, basically, because, he's a playwright, has integrity in his work, we let Pallenberg in the door, and he and Boorman completely rewrote the script to suit their ideas, which, as you brought up, are big ideas.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think that you can look at that is exciting about this film. Boorman had planned to film the movie on location in all the locations. And if you know this movie, you know that it, like on the back of a locust, it flies all over the world in a lot of different locations. But none of that. They couldn't do any of that. So it was almost all shot on sets. In fact, they were even refused permission to shoot on the steps, the Exorcist steps in Georgetown.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me because, like, it's just like the world is saying, don't make this movie. You can't even use the famous steps, which are in every single, like, they're probably worked into the TV show adaptation that's happening right now. Like, that's...
Well, they're probably thinking, well, yeah, you can refuse us the steps, but we want people to start dying like they did in the first movie. Then we'll pay attention to you.
Yeah, maybe Georgetown is like, maybe we don't want people to associate our steps with murder and death and demons. There are these exterior shots in Africa that look like. Remember the old Land of Dairy Queen commercials from the 80s? That's what they look like to me. They're just brown styrofoam, and they just it doesn't work. It doesn't really work at all.
Well, there was an attempt.
An attempt was made
to desaturate the colors to make it more monochrome, and the color was very carefully controlled.
Definitely.
So that you would, whatever you may say about it, this was on purpose. This was the look they wanted.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of it's just because that's how you did things then. But a lot of it is also an attempt to make things look a little weird, a little different.
Sure.
And they do. They also kind of look cheap and like big teeth out in the desert.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think that, like, when you are limited, and again, I keep saying limited. I mean, they had a lot of money, but maybe it wasn't going to the right places. But if you are under constraint, like Nicholas Meyer, who... We can't start talking about Wrath of Khan. I'd talk about it for the entire show. But he wrote the script in like a weekend, basically.
Yeah.
And came up with the script that he did. But anyway, different film. You want to go in a direction, in a unique direction. Like I mentioned, the Land of Dairy Queen. Take it farther. Have it be a thing where we're seeing Africa, but for some reason it's miniature or tiny or strange. Don't try to like recreate it one for one. Let your creative impulses take you somewhere. And this film just seems to be this kind of creative impulses gone wrong. Not bad, as you said before, but for some reason they just don't. Maybe the people involved didn't have the skill to bring forth what they were trying to show. I would argue that Zardoz, which not very highly rated, I think like a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes. I love Zardoz, and I love it because it's weird. but I also think that he really did accomplish something and that people weren't ready for, man. You know what I mean? I think there are a lot of big ideas in it, and he took a budget that I'm fairly certain was very small and just did a lot of really neat stuff. Okay, they eat green bread. Why is the bread green? Because the craft services people had green dye, and it's like, ooh, it's weird bread, it's green. But they're making choices that are unique in lieu of having giant spaceships or great effects.
The unique thing is Sean Connery's costume.
Well, of course, that's it. Everybody remembers. Burt Reynolds was actually supposed to be in that film because
that might have been even sweeter.
Yeah. But again, clearly, unconsciously, I'm trying to get away from E2TH here. We should probably get back to it. Let's talk about the cast. Of course, Richard Burton is in this film. He stars as Philip Lamont.
And Burton, Burton was still doing good work then. So his whole approach to this part is odd and kind of disheartening because he doesn't do anything. And if you read Boorman's autobiography, it wasn't because Burton was hard to get along with. Anything that he was told to do, he did, but he brought nothing of his own.
Yeah.
They said, stand here. He'd stand there. Say that line more, emphatically. He would say it more emphatically. But there was nothing, no level of engagement there. And I know that they originally wanted the priest to be a younger man so that there could be some sexual tension between him and Regan, which is another issue. But when they try to drop that into the climax where you have sexy evil Regan coming on to, basically, nearly 60-year-old Richard Burton, it not only doesn't work, it doesn't work so well. It so well doesn't work that you just, your jaw just drops. And this is a movie full of a lot of jaw-dropping things.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a big problem.
Yeah. Sexy Evil Regan is the name of my 80s cover band. I think that it's too bad. He's so talented, and yeah, like you said, he was game. I just think that and I don't mean to cast aspersions on the work of Mr. Pallenberg, but he's just given nothing to do really in the script. There's this long sequence at the end where he is. It's never really clear. Like he's maybe under the influence of Pazuzu, but he's definitely in this sort of fugue. And 20 minutes go by, and his character doesn't even say anything.
Yeah, just rides trains and planes.
He rides trains, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, like during the synchronizer scenes, he's just totally blank. I guess I don't know what you would do, and if you're an actor who's being told, all right, you're in a mutual hypnosis and you're seeing two girls' hands fight over a Play-Doh heart, like how do you add something to that with improv?
I can see that. But again, if anyone could, you would think Richard Burton could do it.
Yeah. I don't envy his task. I think he was probably getting re-divorced to Elizabeth Taylor at this time. So that couldn't have been easy. And as far as like his, renowned sort of partying nature, I heard or read somewhere that like he started the movie sober, and as the film went on, he ended up getting like drunker and drunker because probably just from having to work on the film. Linda Blair is back again as Regan MacNeil, and I don't know what else to say about that. She went from somebody who was so natural and so innocent in the first film, along with Ellen Burstyn, and did not really evolve, like a lot of child stars, did not really evolve into a great adult performer.
Yeah, I think in The Exorcist, her performance can be mostly credited to William Friedkin for working with her and getting this stuff out of her. And of course, a lot of her performance is created after the fact. She has a different voice as the demon. There's special effects makeup and all that, helps. And she doesn't have that in this movie. She has to rely on her native charm
and her tap dancing skills. And
there's, for whatever reason, it just wasn't there. I mean, she's not as blank as Richard Burton, which is, if damning with faint praise can be done, that does it. You're not as blank as Richard Burton in Exorcist II. but she's also not good. There's no continuity of emotion from one moment to the next. There's no sense that she has anything happening inside that is driving her to do all this stuff. And she has this baby doll voice
right.
that totally works against any seriousness. Now, I don't know if William Friedkin could have even gotten a good performance out of her at this stage in her career.
Yeah.
I think she was, getting into drugs about this time, and, there were a lot of things going on, but and then, of course, we get to the end where we have, sexy Regan, which is so far beyond the pale of even as a concept.
Right.
That it's, you're just lost by that point. And the thing is, I don't know if even recasting her would have made that part work in the way it needed to, because she's playing against Burton and Louise Fletcher, who is just as blank.
Yeah.
And Fletcher literally never changes expression in the whole movie.
No, I know.
Burton's eyebrows will go up and his forehead will crease, so there's something happening there. But Fletcher's nothing.
Yeah, it's weird. Just on the subject of Linda Blair, recasting, I don't know. I think the character has no true emotional through line throughout the movie. If the big payoff is I'm being possessed by a demon at a high school tap show, like it just doesn't, it's hard to follow, and it's not all Blair's fault, I don't think, but she just kind of comes into a scene, and it's not like she elevates it or even de-elevates it, but you just okay, how am I supposed to feel about this? Culminating in, of course, like you said, sexy evil Regan, and you just don't really know how to feel, and then she dances in a locust storm, and it's no big deal. Like you mentioned, Louise Fletcher, Ellen Burstyn is not back in this film. She had no desire to be, and so they went out to find somebody to play an Ellen Burstyn's character, essentially, and settled on Louise Fletcher. But eventually they recast her as Dr. Jean Tuskin, a role that was written for a man, but is strong enough for a woman. And they decided to put her into that role. No doubt drawing on her history and past as Nurse Ratched, of course, a role that she won the Oscar for. And they brought Kitty Wynn back to play Regan's nanny, Sharon.
Well, they had to bring at least somebody back.
Somebody from the first film.
Originally, Detective Kinderman was going to be a main character.
Okay, yeah.
But Lee J. Cobb passed away, and apparently they didn't want to recast that character, which I don't entirely understand, because, as you saw with George C. Scott, another actor can bring something to that character and make it really entertaining.
Sure.
And I think having that level, you have the priest investigating, you have the psychiatrist investigating, and I think having that really grounded character of the police lieutenant would have helped the drama of it. I think he would have been the perspective character for the audience if it was handled correctly. His responses would be what our responses would be.
Yeah, at that point, that's a lot of characters, because we're following Burton's character, who himself comes into this with a lot of baggage. Like he was I should mention, just as far as the cast goes, Max von Sydow's back in this film.
Yeah, he's the guy that comes out unscathed here.
Yeah.
First off, he doesn't have much to say.
Right.
And he's so good at what he does. I mean, in this movie, he's playing, he was not an old man when he played in the first movie, and in this movie, he's playing younger than he was.
Yeah, yeah.
So in both of them, he has to have a lot of makeup, a lot of help doing it, but you're never conscious of it. I mean, I know, people who see that first movie, they don't realize that's old man makeup. They think he's just an old man.
He's been an old man in every role I feel like I've ever seen him in.
Yeah, yeah. And, he, in the scenes where he's driving Pazuzu out of Kokomo, which is just wonderful to say, he's got some dignity. He's got some strength to him there. You don't feel as bad for him as you do for everybody else. But at the same time, it's basically a cameo.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
He's there for a few minutes and then he's gone because it's a flashback.
Right. That's the way you got to do it to save money. Forget about making Robert Downey Jr. look like he did in Less Than Zero with CGI. You just cast a guy in the first movie, put old age of makeup on him, then pull it off, and now he's younger. Yeah. And he's somebody who I think has been sort of slipping negative criticism throughout his career, because he's been in some really great movies, but he's also been in some. He's a worker. He just kind of does work, and so he's been in some real stinkers. He got out of Dune unscathed.
Lee, Christopher Lee manages to get out of things. I mean, and if you can get out of Castle of Fu Manchu with your reputation intact, you're pretty good
for sure. So Burton is just he's already in trouble. His character is. I'm not sure if I understood, but sort of a student or a sort of protege of Max von Sydow's character.
Protege of him, but obviously not a good one, because the first scene is him failing at an exorcism.
Right. But in his defense, the odds are stacked against him, because we find out that this girl and, of course, Regan and other people are not just random possessions. They are spiritual X-Men, if you will. They are the next level of evolution, and so there's a lot riding on this for both heaven and hell. John Boorman actually was originally offered the first movie, the first Exorcist, to make. But he ended up passing on it to make Zardoz, and thank God that he did.
I think it worked out well for everybody involved.
Yeah, and it's this film. I mean, he said this himself, but it definitely comes off this way. I think this film is an answer in a lot of ways to the first film. Whether it was a philosophical difference that he had with the film, or maybe just sour grapes because he passed on a $400 million monster. But this film really. One of the reasons that it doesn't work, I think, is that it really repudiates the world and the worldview of the first film. And you can succeed in doing that. Like, look at the whole point of Terminator is you're fated to do whatever you're going to do, and then Terminator 2, there's no fate but what you make it, and it's an amazing sequel. But that did not happen here.
Yeah, what was I going to say? I think that in reversing this, in basically negating the spiritual worldview of the first movie, he's also divorcing the concept from the Catholic background. And in this sort of story, that's, you do that at your peril, because if you're going to have demons, then you have to accept everything else: angels, God, heaven, hell,
right?
And exorcism as a way to deal with these things. When you take that away and you try to fill it with, for lack of a better term, a new age concept, it's a tricky thing, and it would be very hard to pull off under ideal conditions. Right. But again, that's what he wanted to do. That's his goal, and it's like, good God, man, who thinks of this?
Yeah, that would be a hard thing to pull off. I've seen other properties do it well, like it just comes to mind, like the comic book Hellblazer. The character of Constantine, where there's definitely a Roman Catholic sort of bent to it, but you've got other New Age stuff, and something like the Dresden Files that has like magic and like angels and demons and things like that. But to me, it's you mentioned New Age. I think the New Age thing is kind of the fly in the ointment, because. And I don't know what, I mean, he's got a friend named Rospo Pallenberg. I don't know what Boorman's beliefs, or like a particular like religion was, but it just seems like the general kind of feel-goody late 70s kind of aesthetic is what gets in the way. If they really laid out for us what this universe was and gave us some rules, we might have something to go by. But instead we're throwing a South American like Christianity in there, and then we've got, of course, the regular like Western Christianity, and you've got African spiritualism. You've got a hypnosis machine. It's just a whole bunch of different things.
But the irony of that is that whole concept comes out of the work of Pierre Chardin, a Catholic priest who was basically the model for Father Marin, and the real guy was, I don't know if he was ever actually brought up on heresy charges, but he tap danced around it because
don't say tap dance.
He didn't jiggle as much, I'm sure. But his idea was that that humanity was evolving toward a universal mind that would then integrate with God. And that's very much at the heart of this story.
Yeah.
So it does, in a way, come out of Catholicism, but certainly not traditional Catholicism.
Yeah, and I think somebody had the idea about, Bible, locusts, plagues, Africa, and you just get this, boy, this is definitely a hot-button issue now for good reasons, but you get the depiction of a culture that I'm sure, again, don't know what color Rospo Pallenberg is, but I bet it's not, darker than eggshell, so he's writing about this African character and tribesmen and stuff like that, and it's just kind of comes off. Some of the Africa sequences are really great, like the whole thing on the cliff face, when they're doing the exorcism there. It's just so like strange and so different than what you think of when you think of like an exorcism scene. But otherwise, a lot of those scenes are kind of tone deaf.
It's a visual metaphor sort of, you have to climb higher than you were in order to fight evil.
Sure. Well, you could do that with a bunk bed, but yeah. Speaking of the bed, Linda Blair refused to wear the makeup that she wore in the first film, so all the possessed Regan scenes were played by a double. And a lot of times films will take footage from their original, or sequels will take footage from the original film. In this, they just completely reshot a lot of the exorcism scene, or at least the part that we don't see when Father Karras leaves the room in the first film, and he comes back and what's his name? Marin is dead, yeah. This, they just reshoot it, and it's not done in a creative, or interesting way. It's just done from one angle with an actress that is clearly not Linda Blair, with a Max von Sydow that's just sort of like standing there, oh, my heart, and it kind of goes on. And then, of course, this is all superimposed over Burton and Louise Fletcher, staring at each other. So it's just...
And then the Reagans are thumb wrestling.
And they're thumb wrestling over the heart, yeah. I mean, this is not, is this the man that made Zardoz? I don't think so.
No, I think it is the same guy. I think he's pushing a visual storytelling that, is trying to cover these kind of esoteric plot points.
Yeah.
He's doing it all in one frame.
Yeah.
Everything is happening right there. And that's, I can respect that, and I kind of like that. Again, so much of it falls because of the performances, because, urgent Regan thumb wrestling, evil demon Regan is not a good conflict, and it's not handled well or performed well. And, and Louise Fletcher, who is, it seems more like an asthma attack than a heart attack, but hey,
right.
And it leaves no scars. There's no repercussions from this.
No.
And stuff like that. I can see how it doesn't work. But again, if you're just watching the visuals, if you're just seeing how the story is presented to you, I find it very interesting.
I do as well. I almost want to go back in time and throw John Boorman in a cryogenic tube or something like that. Or actually, I guess if I'm time traveling, just bring him to 2017 and hook him up with like a great CGI animator or like storyboard artist, because he seems to have all these really out there ideas. And like you said, during that, he's running like 3 movies at a time on top of each other during that scene. So just hook him up with somebody who can like give him some great effects, or just, clearly in his mind, he's seeing things that aren't going to be easily translated to the screen. But see what he can come up with modern effects technology. Nobody's going to let him do that now.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his last movie was. I haven't heard anything about him in a while. He may be retired.
I'm sure he probably is. Yeah.
I know he worked with his oldest daughter on a lot of things, and she passed away. So that may have prompted his retirement.
Okay. Well, that's sad. Screenings of the film did not go very well. It was so poorly received at the opening night screening that people threw things at the screen, apparently, which is always bad. William Blatty, as you can imagine, was a little bit vengeful about the film and was one of the first to say that the movie was really bad. And the screening that he attended, he said people were just openly laughing at the real serious parts.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly valid reaction to some of this. I mean, it's wooden. There's one of the big things that worked in the first film was you felt for those characters.
Yeah.
And you felt Ellen Burstyn's pain at what her daughter was going through, and Father Karras's guilt was just literally just plastered all over his face.
Yeah.
And you don't get that here.
No, and it's one of the reasons that the setup to the first movie is so long. Like, there's an hour where nothing really crazy happens, and it's because we're just spending time with the MacNeils, and we're learning that, heaven, hell, spiritual, X-Men, locusts, whatever. We're talking about, like, the life of this little girl that does not deserve this to happen to her. Right. And so, yeah, you really get that emotional payoff where this is just some great ideas where it's zinging all over the world. But speaking of going all over the world, James Earl Jones is in this at a time where this is, Star Wars, same year.
Yeah. Like a month before.
Yeah. Where he's not at a point where he could really say no to something like this, or at least something like this he'd say like, I think I could probably do that.
Yeah, he's the adult version of the African boy that Father Merrin exorcises in the flashbacks.
Right.
And Richard Burton's character, Father Lamont, sees visions of him in a high priest locust get up with an enormous locust head piece.
Yes.
Which I just love the idea that James Earl Jones has this and lounges around his house. And,
right.
Or wears this when he's recording Darth Vader's voice.
Yeah, right. He accepted his honorary Oscar wearing it.
But I mean, this all goes back to what you mentioned before, was this biblical idea of evil showing up as a plague of locusts.
Yeah.
Which again is not a bad concept. The problem you get with it is when you break it down and you're supposed to accept Pazuzu, this awful demon manifesting as one grasshopper.
Yeah.
And there's the whole thing about the brushing of the wings, which once Pazuzu's wings brush you, you're doomed, and that's
right.
That's not a bad folkloric idea. It just, if you try to realize it literally, you are doomed.
Yeah.
Because a grasshopper is not scary. And no matter how you focus on it, what background you superimpose it against, a lone grasshopper is not scary.
No.
Now the swarm of locusts, that's a valid image for, evil, for decay, because nothing good comes from a swarm of locusts.
Right.
But again, the way it's realized with styrofoam, packing eggs painted brown and blown out of a blower, while the actors have actual locusts on their face, and
right.
The difference is obvious.
Yeah. And the application of scientific principles or reason to these spiritual elements is a neat idea as well. You've got Father Merrin, Demon Hunter, like going across the world and like looking at this stuff in a sort of Kolchak Nightstalker kind of way. Where's that movie? I want to see that. That's awesome.
Well, the movie Dominion is kind of that.
Sure.
It's telling the same story, which is part of Blatty's original novel. But obviously it's telling it differently, and it's expanded a great deal, and it goes off on its own directions because Paul Schrader was raised a Calvinist, which is a whole different thing.
Yeah, totally different. And having Kokumo grow up and become like a scientist who is sort of applying his knowledge to the scientific efforts to sort of control something like this, like that's a neat idea.
Yeah.
But we get tap dancing instead.
But he's completely he doesn't put any stock in the idea that the locusts are manifestations of evil.
Right.
he sees them, just as bugs that need to be controlled or eradicated. And when you take it out to that level, you're left with, well, why in the hell are we even talking to this guy?
Right. There's no reason to talk to him. Yeah.
He was seriously saying, no one believes me, but I know that the locust horde is full of evil, and you would have to say evil.
Evil, right.
Then you would have a connection there. But otherwise, he's just an entomologist with a deep voice.
Yeah, it's so strange. I mean, they take this detour to. I mean, I can see going to Africa in the flashbacks, but I'm not really sure why Burton's character has to go there. I guess we wouldn't have Ned Beatty in this film if he didn't go to Africa. Who's in this film for?
Mental Edwards, yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine why, but he's in this movie. And it's just sort of like, and it also makes me wonder why when Burton finally contacts Pazuzu, when he is synchronizing with Regan, why Pazuzu tells him the whole plan. Why doesn't he just give this guy a heart attack and just be done with it? Like, he takes him on this magic grasshopper mystery tour where he kind of tells him the whole thing, and I can't figure out why he would even bother to do that, except because he's just a proud demon.
Yeah. Well, and and you could make the case that he wants to show off for this representative of the other side.
Okay, sure.
To show how. But again, it's in the execution where it lacks. The fact that we even notice that it's incongruous says that it's not done terribly well.
Yeah. What did you think about the the Uri Geller reference in the film? There's the
spoon bending thing.
Yeah.
I didn't see the point to that. I mean, and Uri Geller is one of those things. In the 70s. Everybody knew who he was. He was on all the talk shows, and James Randi hadn't gotten around to thoroughly debunking him as we all know now.
Right.
So I guess it was just a way of maybe implying that Geller was another one of these avatars of enlightenment.
Oh, really?
That was out there. And it's like it's not just Reagan, it's not just Kokomo. There's Uri.
Let's see that prequel.
Yeah.
It's a whole drawer full of spoons this time. You mentioned the music before, which I have to admit is pretty good. Although this movie, wow, the opening is nuts. I mean, it's just words on a black screen, but it's playing Morricone's arrangement, Little Afro-Flemish Mass, and it's not the kind of thing that you expect to hear from a sequel to a incredibly successful movie. Like, you are suddenly assaulted by this wild ululations.
Yeah, it's almost like you're hearing an exorcism of some kind.
Yeah, exactly.
And because it's not in English or in any sort of European form that we're used to, it is jarring, and it's really compelling, I think. And there's a point where Burton gets roused enough to bring something to a speech about, the evil that's in Reagan, where he calls it perverted and perverting, which is a great image and a great line.
Sure.
But there's a musical sting with that creates an atmosphere that if the whole movie had, we wouldn't be talking about it this way.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. It's a strong choice, and I think a strong choice, good or bad, is always better than a weak choice. It reminds me of the Zither soundtrack from The Third Man, which is like The Third Man is a perfect movie, and then you lay all this Zither music over it. But it wouldn't be what it is without that.
Yeah. And everybody remembers that. They may not be able to remember the tune, but they remember the sound.
Yeah. Boorman spent over $1 million of Warner Brothers' money to basically reshoot and re-edit the final reel. He actually pulled the movie from some theaters to recut it after its release. And he added in the locust taming dance at the end of the film from Regan, which I was amazed to find it's cheesy, but I was amazed to learn that it was an addition, because to me that seems like the thematic mirroring of the bull roarer dance that Kakuma was doing at the beginning. I mean, why wasn't that already in there?
Yeah, that's the way I feel about it, because it does. It brings everything full circle, and it makes perfect sense, which you can't say about a lot of stuff in this movie. And, why didn't somebody notice this before?
Yeah, I don't know.
And what did they have in place of it? Just, the demon falling through the floor and Regan walking out of the rubble?
Yeah, I think they shot like 5 or 6 versions of the ending where they both die and where Burton's character dies and she walks out of the rubble, and this is the one that they eventually landed on. I think the director's cut is pretty much the only cut that you can get these days.
Yeah, I haven't seen another cut in any form. I used to have the VHS, and it was the same as the DVD.
Okay, yeah. This movie was voted the second worst movie of all time at the Golden Turkey Awards. It lost the #1 spot to Plan 9 from Outer Space. So that's rarefied air for a film.
That is, and both of them are sincere expressions of somebody's, deep artistic beliefs.
Right.
They're not hack jobs. They're not Sharknadoes.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. They're definitely on a napkin. This napkin is full of scrawled ideas. Well, speaking of people reviewing the film and their opinions of it, let's talk pick of the patch. I found some contemporary reviews of this film. Not many. It's hard to find films that are both bad and old. Opinions of them from the time tend to fall away, and we get a lot of modern blogger reviews.
Right.
77 wasn't a bad movie year. Of course, you had Star Wars, Annie Hall, a lot of good films, but it's definitely coming down from the heights of the early 70s. And reviewers, what do they know? They didn't like Sorcerer, so they can't be trusted. But I checked the Variety Archive. Variety archives almost all of its old reviews and articles online. And I found a review that says basically, well, I'll just quote it word for word. Since any title containing Roman numerals invites comparison, the answer is no. Exorcist II is not as good as The Exorcist. It isn't even close. Gone now is the simple clash between good and evil, replaced by some goofy transcendental spiritualism. So that reviewer was not feeling the sort of New Age elements that I think we've agreed did have potential in the film.
Yeah, and in the 70s, it was a cynical time.
You're right. You liked Crystals or you didn't.
Yeah. To be fair, a lot of the New Age stuff that penetrated the total consciousness of the culture was all based out of California, and Lord knows nobody else trusted anything out of California.
Yeah. I did find a lot of mentions in the New York Times archives, but no actual review. And most of the mentions were negative. It'd be an article talking to Richard Burton in 1978, and he'd be like, "Oh boy, I don't even remember shooting that movie," that sort of thing. I'll say that Pauline Kael, longtime critic for the New Yorker, liked the movie, but she famously hated the original film. So yeah. I think that she had a lot to prove in saying
that reverse barometer thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she definitely, and I mean, she's clearly a skilled critic, but it was just one of those things where she and that movie did not get along. She did not like what was going on in that film, and so she was of the same mind, I think, as Boorman in wanting to basically disprove, like it's almost like a academic paper that's trying to disprove the worldview of the first film. I should warn you that no major sites, as far as I could see, the websites that is, have reviewed this film. The best I could get was a Flavor Wire review, which is relatively modern. Jason Bailey of Flavor Wire says, it's 118 minutes of endless flashy light hypnotism, staggeringly terrible locust effects, and Richard Burton wandering around what appears to be Tatooine.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Right. That sounds like a great movie to me. Film Freak Central, Bill Chambers of Film Freak Central said, possibly the worst film ever made and surely the worst sequel ever made. 0 out of 4 stars. I do agree with the second part as far as the drop in quality and also just being a counterpoint, trying to attack the first film's ideas. I think it's probably the worst sequel ever made.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah? What would be your nomination for worst sequel?
Oh, man, now, of course, you're asking me that, and I'm trying to think what would be.
I think Airplane 2 is up there.
Yeah. Staying Alive.
No, there you go.
I would watch Exorcist II on an endless loop rather than sit through Staying Alive again.
Oh, boy. That's my next podcast. Wow. And on the plus side, Fernando Croce of Cine Passion did say that this film was, quote, a glittering riposte to the original's earthbound viciousness.
Yeah, and I think that was the goal. That was what they were trying to get across, and were just sort of defeated on every front.
Yeah, I think he was picking up what Boorman was putting down there. Well, as we come to the end of the show here, could we get a final recommendation for you? Would you say definitely see this or definitely don't see it?
I would say definitely see it. I think it's like a lot of those things. When you hear that it's so extremely bad or so extremely good, for that matter, you have to see it for yourself and make up your own mind.
Yeah.
And there is no right response. If you think it sucks, then it sucks to you.
Sure.
But if you can look past the stuff that sucks, there's some good stuff in there, I think.
Yeah, the biggest crime is boring, and it's not boring. You can give it that.
No, it's not that. And it's odd because the performances are so dull, you would think the movie would be boring, but it's not.
No, it's not. So I think we are agreed. You've won me over. I say people CE2TH.
E2TH.
Yes, you won't be disappointed if you don't expect much. So that's it. Thanks for joining us on the show. If you want to let us know how you felt, listeners, about this movie, you can tell us on Facebook at facebook.com/Craft Disservices. Also, we're on Twitter at Craft Disservice. We're also on Apple Podcasts. You can look for Craft Disservices there and subscribe, rate, and review us if you would. It helps us out a lot. And you can also find us on Google Play and Stitcher, all that good stuff. Alex, where can people find you online?
They can find me at alexbledsoe.com, and I'm on Twitter as Alex Bledsoe, and on Facebook as author Alex Bledsoe.
Author Alex Bledsoe. Got it. Anything you're working on right now you can tell us about?
My new novel, The Fairies of Sadieville, will be out in April.
In April, and available everywhere?
Everywhere.
Awesome. So check that out, pre-order that, and thanks for joining me, Alex.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. This has been a blast.
Yes, it has. And the credits are rolling. This is Aaron for Alex saying keep it real.